Colonel John Moore. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Major Woodhams of the 30th Battalion Infantry. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. And Fred will be up soon to do grace and so on, but this is a really nice occasion to have Sir Peter here and Lady Lynn and all guests. I found out that the Israeli High Commissioner is an infantry guy. That's all right. There's nothing wrong with that, T-Boy. It's just that, we're not. I mean, I'm not. And what am I talking about? Taking on Sir Peter then? Jeez, that's dangerous. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're now going to march on the standards. On display there are some of the association standards that have come in, and they're more for display. But these are the war standards which we used over when we're acknowledging the different wars right through to the last battle.
How did Denmark get into this? Just because of my ancestors?
Ladies and gentlemen, in order, the first one on the left is the Boer War Standard. That follows by Harry Chauvel's Standard, and that is the light horse era, followed by World War I. World War, we have the battles of Hamel and St. Quentin on it. You'll then see the brigade standards of the 2nd Division headquarters. First one, red you can see, 5th Brigade and 8th Brigade. Quite often the 14th, the 4th Brigade standard would come from Melbourne, but not this time. So well done, standard bearers, and that presents the standards. Thank you. Now, next is the standards. The Air Force cadets will now march in the pennons of the light horse. Now call Captain Reverend Fred Nile to say grace.
Thank you, John, and as your host today, I'm very happy to add my welcome to every one of you, and thank you for coming. If it wasn't for the virus, we would have had 700 people here in the dining room, but we've had to operate under all those restrictions, and I thank God that we've succeeded and still had the event today. So we'll ask God's blessing now. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to come together as we commemorate the victory at Beersheba and the following victory of the freeing of Jerusalem, Lord. And we just thank you for all those who have served and are serving in our Army, Navy and Air Force, and those who have given their lives for the defence of our nation, to enable us to enjoy the freedom that we have. So I thank you now, in Jesus Christ's name, for this opportunity, for the food, for fellowship, for friendship, and ask your blessing upon us. In Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Well, thank you very much, Colonel Moore, and thank you for that introduction. More importantly, can I thank you on behalf of New South Wales Government of your long-standing service and advocacy of the recognition of the Defence Forces into our history and the appropriate recognition that they now receive today. So thank you for that. Can I, yeah, you deserve the clap. Can I also recognise the Israeli Ambassador? Welcome to New South Wales Parliament. You'll find that this is New South Wales, the best state in the whole of the country. You only need to come to New South Wales and you'll find it's obviously the best, much better than Canberra. On that sense, can I recognise the Honourable Sir Peter Cosgrove and Lady Cosgrove? Can I say that it's great to see you're back from Canberra, and this is the highlight of your obviously time from leaving Canberra was a highlight, I understand. So it is a wonderful place, and all the other serving and past and serving members of the Defence Force and their families here today, and especially our dignitaries today. So I'm not going to go through. John said he's going to go through the complete list later, but I need to highlight my colleague, the Honourable David Elliott, Minister for Police. And you will find, David, there's no more passionate person for service personnel and veterans than David Elliott, and he did wonderful things when he was the Minister for that, and I carry on his legacy now as the Acting Minister. So thank you, David. Most importantly, yeah, he deserves a clap. He got lots of money for it, and that's the mark of success in Parliament, money. Speaking about money, can I recognise Captain the Honourable Fred Nile for your service to not only Parliament but also Reserves Day and hosting today. It was very interesting. About a month ago I came to see Captain Nile, and he said, "Oh, would you like to come along to a function?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I'd like to come to Reserves Day's function as the Acting Minister for Veterans." And he goes, "That's really good." And he said, "I'll come along." And he goes, "But I need some money from you, from the New South Wales Government." He didn't quite tell me that the Premier had also promised the money, so he actually doubled up. Well done, well done. So a master's said. It is certainly a great honour to be here on behalf of the Premier of New South Wales, and it is a great pleasure to be with you today to celebrate 20 years of the Reserve Forces Day, a significant milestone to acknowledge our Reserve Forces. Also, I'd like to recognise 20 years of the Reserve Forces Day March from 1998 to 2018, and we saw some great shots today in the video. And a special highlight today is the launch of the book Twice a Citizen. And I saw Ross. Where are you, Ross? And his lovely wife. These are great people. They were in my electorate of Parramatta. So I did not, and many people won't know that Ross is also over 50 years at JP, continues his service. So thank you on your book, and thank you for your service to the community, Ross. As we approach the 103rd anniversary of the Battle of Beersheba later this month, today we also pay tribute to the Australian Light Horse Regiments from World War I, particularly the charge of Beersheba by the 12th Light Horse from the Tamworth, New England area, and the 4th Light Horse Regiment from Victoria. And I look forward to hearing more from John Howells shortly. And can I say that it's wonderful to see that the reserves are getting their recognition today. I think the military does a much better job. Can I say that they're an integral part of the Defence Forces, as we know, in all theatres of conflict, all theatres of war. And for me personally, my first experience was when I was went away to the Solomon Islands for a short time to have a look. I was an employer at that stage, to have a look where our reserves are doing peacekeeping in the Solomon Islands, and it was a great eye-opener to see the integral role. And I remember the captain, I think he was at the time, who actually controlled the whole Solomon Islands peacekeeping. He was actually a primary school teacher. He was and I couldn't imagine going from primary school kids looking after a little class of 7-year-olds to actually having a base where you have 500 people and doing vital work. But so today, more than ever, the reservists are more important than ever. We see them most recently in the COVID-19 response, adding to our capability. And so, on behalf of the New South Wales Government, can I thank all the reservists here today? Can I thank our very special guests here today? But most importantly, can I thank all the family and loved ones of our reserves? Without you, your loved ones can't serve on behalf of our country, which we owe such a great debt. Thank you.
I'm going to ask John Howells now to speak. John's a historian for the Lancers. He's been an overseas tour guide. So over to you, John, please, if you would talk about the charge.
Honoured guests, fellow reservists, ladies and gentlemen. On the 21st of October 1917, General Sir Edmund Allenby was deploying his forces in preparation for the third attempt to take the... John, you've got a message. To take the Gaza-Be'er Sheva line. Sorry. Since the halting of the Ottoman forces heading to close the Suez Canal at the Battle of Ramani in August 1916, the British forces had been working their way up the coast on a line that went out, touching on the Negev, the desert to the east, and the coast. The coast was the main thing because that's where the pipelines were, that's where they could lay, that's where they could get their water. But when they hit Gaza on the 21st of October, everything stopped. General Sir Archibald Murray was fighting the battle from his cushy Cairo headquarters, and he was relying on telecommunications. He was a future man. He was using the latest technology as it was. The Turks were being forced from the town as darkness approached on that day. The assault was going in and it was working. But news went back to Cairo that there were Turkish forces assembling for a counterattack. The assault was called off, and victory was snatched from the jaws of defeat. There were no forces assembling, and back in Cairo you couldn't see it. Murray decided to attack again on the 17th of April. By then the Turkish garrison at Gaza and along the line to Beersheba was greatly reinforced. The assault, under the command of a Lieutenant General Dobell, a Canadian serving with the British forces, was not a success again. Took them 6 months to have another go. And in that 6 months, there'd been a few changes. General Sir Archibald Murray had assumed command. General Murray had had great success in France, not necessarily seen by his superiors as great success, and it was better to get him off to a sideshow where he couldn't do any damage. He did damage there. At the same time, General Sir Harry Chauvel was promoted to command the what was now called the Desert Mounted Corps. Allenby's plan was to hold the bulk of the Turkish forces at Gaza by a feint. He was then going to move against Beersheba. Now, you think, if you look at the thing, it's a single line, Gaza, Beersheba. Why is Beersheba so important? Because Beersheba had water. If they broke through at Beersheba, was on the flank, then they could go through with such force as to make the rest of the line withdraw. Wasn't worthwhile going beyond Beersheba, because beyond Beersheba you had the Judean hills, and beyond that the Dead Sea. There wasn't any water there that would support a suitable force to be able to move and make the line withdraw. The plan called for an attack by the 20th Infantry Corps from the southwest, with the Desert Mounted Corps holding the ground to the south and east, moving into the town only once the infantry had taken the wells. The plan was not for a mounted or light horse engagement. It was an infantry job, with the cavalry doing what the cavalry did, which was to move in and secure the wells into the town once the wells had been secured. Didn't quite work out that way. 21st of October saw the light horse assembling south of Gaza, near the coast and water. They would move out on the 27th. 3 long days in the desert would follow without any water. They moved past a town called Azul, which was about 25k south of Beersheba, and some of them got some water there. But they then had another 50 kilometres to run before they got into position near Beersheba. Now, in Beersheba, as they moved into position, it became obvious to Chauvel that the key ground that they had to take in order to get into the town, or in order to have an approach to the town, was Tel El Saba. Tel El Saba is like a pimple hill almost, at the end of a range of hills, and it dominates Beersheba, the town. It's now called Tel Beersheba. It's now the site of Abraham's well, and I'm sure if you take one of the Israeli Travel Centre's guides and go there, they will show you all that sort of thing. Very, very interesting place. But when you get there, you see it dominates everything. Chauvel said, that's got to go. And he sent against it the New Zealand General Tait. He was commanding the Anzac Mounted Division, which was centred on the New Zealand Mounted Rifles. The attack started at 0900 on the 31st. By the time the hill was taken at 1500, all of the light horse brigades, except for one, had been sucked into that fight, including the 1st Light Horse Brigade, and the 1st Light Horse Brigade contains the regiment that I served in. That's my connection to this particular thing. At 3 o'clock, they finally took Tel El Saba. At the same time, so what had happened there was a battalion of Turks had held back a division plus for 5 hours. At the same time, 20 Corps was in trouble. They couldn't break into Beersheba either. And so what you had was Allenby, kind of bloke who went forward. He was at the 20 Corps headquarters, and he telegraphed Chauvel and said, we've got to take it tonight. The men and the horses can't go without any water for any longer. You've got to do something. What he did was use Brigadier General Grant's 4th Light Horse Brigade, the 4th, the 12th and the 11th Light Horse Regiments. The 4th and 12th did the assault, the 11th was in reserve. He had used his time during the day to get aerial reconnaissance to look at the trench lines that he would have to go through if he went into the town. So he was thinking ahead. And the trench lines were the ones that were opposing him, were lightly wired and did not have horse pits. And so he knew that an assault was possible. He ordered an approach at the gallop, a dismount on objective, and of course the rest is legend. Now just one thing, and I know I've gone over my 5 minutes, John. You did ask me to talk about this. If you are interested, in Parramatta, in Dr. Lee's electorate, there is one cultural institution that is still open every Sunday, taking visits, the New South Wales Lancers Museum. Fully COVID safe, quite cheap. Thank you.
We're now going to go now to the last parade. Now, when we ran a lot of this stuff, one of the guys used to recite this, and I thought it was a very good one to recite after the charge of Beersheba. I'm going to ask Don Ibe to come forward. Don Ibe, APM OAM.
Sir Peter Cosgrove, Lady Cosgrove, distinguished guests, reservists, ladies and gentlemen. As John has indicated, thank you, John, for this opportunity to read this poem in regard to the horses that were involved in the First World War and the light horse. If I might briefly, like John, just speak a little more than my time limit. I would like to speak very briefly on behalf of the Mounted Police and the light horse that have been involved in most of those Reserve Forces Day parades and vice-regal escorts. I can assure you that they felt it a privilege to be involved and be part of those Reserve Forces Day marches. In fact, I was talking to some of the light horse people in recent weeks from out in the bush, and they said we used to look forward to coming to Sydney every year. We'd get a week's drill training by Mounted Police on the Saturday. We'd ride through the streets of Sydney on the Sunday. And probably the most notable Sunday was when John contacted me and said, we want to get 90 horses through the streets of Sydney to represent 90 years since the outbreak of World War I. We got 110 with 21 police horses. We had 131 that we had to get Commissioner's approval to get through the streets of Sydney. But we did it. And each year since then, we've had an impressive involvement in Reserve Forces Day parades. I might mention just briefly one guy, a Major Dick Adams, who was responsible for getting and coordinating these light horse people from troops all over New South Wales each year and acting as their commander in the escorts and also in the parades that were conducted in Sydney up until 2018. We've heard a little bit about Beersheba, and we know that the light horse was involved in the Boer War and a lot of horses away in the First World War. Of all the tens of thousands of horses that left this country and went overseas in the First World War, only one returned. And this poem by Ben Joe Patterson looks at the perspective of the horses. And as John mentioned, his title is The Last Parade. With never a sound of trumpet, with never a flag displayed, the last of the old campaigners lined up for the last parade. Weary they were and battered, shoeless and knocked about. From under their rugged forelocks, their hungry eyes looked out. And they watched as the old commander read out to the cheering men the nation's thanks and the orders to carry them home again. And the last of the old campaigners, sinewy, lean and spare, he spoke for his hungry comrades. Have we not done our share? Starving and tired and thirsty, we limped on the blazing plain. And after a long night's picket, you saddled us up again. We froze on the wind-strapped koppies when the frost lay snowy white. Never a halt in daytime, never a rest at night. We knew when the rifles raffled from the hillsides bare and brown, and our weary shoulders we felt warm blood run down. As we turned for the stretching gallop, crushed to the earth with weight, but we carried our riders through it, carried them perhaps too late. Steel, we were steel to stand it, we that have lasted through, we that are old campaigners, pitiful, poor and few. Over the sea you brought us, over the leagues of foam. Now we have served you fairly, will you not take us home? Home to the Hunter River, to the flats where lucens grow. Home where the Murrumbidgee runs, white with melted snows. This is a small thing surely. Will not you give command that the last of the old campaigners go back to their native land? They looked at the grim commander, but never a sign he made. Dismiss, and the old campaigners moved off from their last parade. Thank you.
Parade. But now what I'm going to do is call on Frank to say the loyal toast. I'd call the shots here, wouldn't You just got to be tough sometimes. It's really hard.
I spent 6 hours doing a quiz program.
Hey, listen, I can blame.
About 6 series.
I can blame John Howells, Don Ive, and now it's Frank.
You're looking at the wrong thing. How do you put up with him?
Well, it's been a lot of years.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please be upstanding? The Queen. Please be seated.
Now, somewhere in our midst is Major Irving Warren. Where are you, Irving? Right. Now, Irving got a repeat performance because he did so well 2 years ago, and I don't think he's aged or dropped a bundle or that. So, over to you, Irving. What Irving is going to do is toast the Reserve Forces Day Council, and Sir Peter Cosgrove is going to respond to this speech.
Sir Peter and Lady Cosgrove, National Chairman and State Chairman John Moore, our host Captain Fred Nile, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to have the honour of proposing a toast to the RFD Council again. When I was asked to propose the toast, my first thought was that I could probably rehash that 2018 toast on the basis that what I said then probably wouldn't be remembered. Then John went and included my words in the Twice the Citizen, so I thought I'd better change it. One thing I will repeat is that the Council has received excellent support over the years, not only from Major Frank Woodhams as the Treasurer, Ian Meek as Secretary, but also from the administration team of Yelena Berta and Lynn Scott. They've done a sterling job. Over those 20 years, the parade location changed many times, usually due to circumstances beyond anyone's control, and with probably the most dramatic and difficult parade being held in the Sydney Town Hall on very short notice because of extended heavy rain making outside venues unusable. There was a quagmire out there. So it worked well in the Town Hall, an example of the RFD Council's ability to solve problems. Now, every generation of soldiers serves in a somewhat different army. As World War II conditions, as world conditions and Australian priorities changed, back in the 1950s, World War II was a recent memory. The communist threat was a reality for Western democracies, as was the possibility of nuclear warfare. The role of the citizen military forces was to provide a rapid expansion force if a war broke out. I recall our battalion had an annual camp in the late 1950s, and we had 712 people attend out of a possible 732. Over the years, many soldiers have changed from reserve forces to active forces, or vice versa. Today, reserve soldiers can be found integrated at very high levels into our regular forces, often on active service. Their role and training may have changed extensively since the 1950s, but Australian soldiers are still Australian soldiers who like to get together with their mates. One generation soon relates to another. And I was one of those who served for some years on full-time duty during the 60s. I was posted to headquarters Eastern Command, and a group of mainly captains often had lunch together. And I recall one of those officers who was very proud of his son, who had graduated from Duntroon. He thought his son had a very good army career ahead of him. Well, John Cosgrove got that right. It's very pleasing to see Sir Peter here as our guest of honour. He has always supported the Army Reserve, and support at the top is always essential. Returning to Reserve Forces Day, what did it do? Well, it gave thousands of former servicemen and women who had enjoyed their service a chance to get together and remember the highlights of that service. Being in a parade was special. You don't forget what is required of you on parade. I must admit that marching often reminds me of a sound that is no longer heard. That of a battalion of 700 men in leather boots crunching along a gravel road at night with no other sound to be heard. That went out with leather boots. But I'm sure others have had similar experiences which they still remember today. Each of the RFD parades did provide participants with a chance to recall the camaraderie that they shared with fellow soldiers, to recall those who are no longer with us, and also to give those who did not know about associations a chance to realise that they could easily be part and join up an association. When this luncheon was being planned, there was quite a strong interest from my members in attending. Then along came COVID-19, and here we are with greatly reduced numbers. But once again, the RFD Council has adjusted to these circumstances, and the show goes on in the presence of some very distinguished guests. Now it's time to congratulate John Moore in his current role as National and New South Wales Chairman, and all past and present members of the Reserve Forces Day Council. And I would ask you to rise and join me in a toast to the Council. The Reserve Forces Day Council.
The inestimable John Moore was going to introduce me, but I figure I've got reasonably high recognition here. John, you're a marvel. You pull the strings of the state and you assemble us all. There are so many luminaries here today, and I do get a chance to speak later, so I'll keep this brief and my preamble briefer. I thank the ministers for, and the Honourable Fred Nile particularly, who's our host, but the ministers for representing the state. Your Excellency Tibor, it's great to have you here. My reply to that toast will just dwell on three characters: Sir Roden Cutler, Sir Lawrence Street, and the Honourable Tim Fisher. The three doyens of this 20-year odyssey, whose contribution, whose leadership, whose energy and the regard in which they are held by the Australian people was superlative. But I'm not going to be terribly dignified or ethereal about references to them. Of course, Sir Roden was a legend, absolute legend. I got a military cross from him just over there in 1971, And you can't imagine the impact it had on a young fellow like me as a very new officer in the Australian Army to be handed this award by this famous man. The connection to the State of Israel is immense. Sir Retd fought in Syria and Lebanon, and near him was one of your most famous national heroes, Moshe Dayan, who in those days was working with the British, for the British, that is, in this case with the Australians, when he received that wound. The signature of which, the eye patch, was, if you like, the globally renowned image of the man. It also leads us to think about the State of Israel, where it's a nation in arms, and it must be. And that, in some ways, resonates back to Australia. Sir Retd was a mighty figure. Sir Lawrence Street, what a distinguished jurist. What a famous figure within Australian society. Sir Lawrence and Lady Street and their daughter Jess were present at Gallipoli in 2005. I was there, I was the Chief of the Defence Force. You would think an imperial figure like Sir Lawrence would need very little external support for the decisions within his family. But on the night before that 90th anniversary of Gallipoli was to be celebrated, commemorated across the water, we were in Chanakli. And Sir Lawrence came to me. I was, as I said, the Chief of the Defence Force, and a piratical figure, a person of quite possibly gravitas. And he said, I have a problem, Peter. He said, you need to assist me. Tomorrow, our daughter Jess is to appear as a representative of Australian youth at the ceremony at 10 a.m. at Lone Pine. And she's here representing her school, Asham, I should call it, but she's supposed to be in school uniform, and she's rather fixated on going in civilian clothes. And myself and Penny are thinking she really ought to be in uniform. What do you think? Well, here's Sir Lawrence, and here's Lady Street, and there's Jess, and he's fixing me with a Mandrake-like look. You all remember Mandrake, the magician? Remember how Mandrake gestures hypnotically? Well, Sir Lawrence gave me the Sir Lawrence Street hypnotic look. And in robot-like terms, I said she should wear school uniform. He said, there you see, Jess, the Chief of the Defence Force believes you should wear school uniform. So this was done, and Jess, you're a much better woman for it. Imagine how I'm imagining that the principal of her fantastic school would have just dropped dead if she'd appeared in civilians. And lastly, the one of a kind, the legendary Tim Fisher. What a mighty man. Tim and I were always friends because I thought he was marvellous. He'd been in the military, he'd been to Vietnam, he'd been in 1 RAR on a most meritorious tour of South Vietnam. As they say, he'd been to see the elephant. And here he was back and in the pomp of his life. He was the Deputy Prime Minister. When he left the Parliament, they have what they call, in the Federal Parliament, these valedictory moments where some cynic has named the debates or the short addresses produced on the departure of a long-serving member. They call them the hypocrisies. I don't know why they would say that. But when Tim was farewelled in the Parliament, the hypocrisies were not that. They were absolutely genuine from both sides of the aisle and from the crossbenches. Every speech was in praise of this wonderful man. And Tim and I agreed on most things except on the elevation of Sir John Monash to the rank of Field Marshal, where I was indeed implacably opposed and he was implacably in support. And we could have these arguments over and over. But this wonderful member, this doyen of your organisation would continue to press the point. We were not far from here in Paddington, across from the barracks at the Paddington RSL, and the reservists were having a conference. I was then Chief of Army or Chief of the Defence Force, and I was there and being quizzed about various things, and naturally enough about the reserve. And one of the things that came up is, well, General, are you in favour of the Reserve Forces Day parade? And of course, one of these poison questions that comes into a fellow with his hands on the resources. But my mother did not raise a stupid boy, so I was aware that this was very careful ground. So apparently a person X in the audience thought of it, passed it on to person Y, who thought, I'm not going to get up and ask this bloke that question. So they heaved it along to Tim Fisher. Tim may or may not have been the Deputy Prime Minister at the time, but he was pretty close. So I'm getting a question to me, a Dorothy Dixer, so to speak, from the Deputy Prime Minister, or if he was retired, he was only just, to say, General, what's your attitude towards the Reserve Forces Day parade? And apparently I'm reminded that I said something like, well, of course, if the nation's not at war and we have assets available, of course, we will support, with all of our power, the Reserve Forces Day parade. That would be something we'd want to do, unless something else interferes, And then I thought, that's a pretty wishy-washy answer, so how am I going to finish this? So I said, does that answer your question, Second Lieutenant Fisher? And apparently it did.
His answer is yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, yes, to applause. I would just say to you that they are emblematic of the reservists in this nation. Emblematic of the connection between the community, the widest Australian community, and its men and women in uniform. And they have been wonderful stewards of this venture over its very meritorious 20 years. You'll hear from me later. I thank you for the toast.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move now to the toast to the Australian Defence Force, and that will be given by Colonel Edward McCain. Now, I hadn't met him before. It's really interesting because one of his medals is Timor-Leste. Have I got it right? And he was part of the action. I read Sir Peter's book only recently. It's been out for some time. But I thought it was easier than it was, but it wasn't. So anyway, Edward's going to propose a toast to the Australian Defence Force, and it will be responded by Colonel Don Tait.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to stand for a toast to the Australian Defence Force. To the Australian Defence Force.
Sir Peter, Lady Cosgrove, the Honourable Fred Nile, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I thought John might introduce me, but he didn't. So I'll tell you a little story before I start on the Defence Force, although it's related to it. I was actually the Chief of Staff at the 2nd Division, and a phone call came in and it said, get your backside up, the Land Commander wants to see you. So up I go, I thought, what have I done wrong? Walked in and he said, it's Murray Blake, he said, you're going to move west. I said, oh, not West Australia, surely? And he said, no, a little bit west in Sydney. And I said, well, Holsworthy, whatever, and he said, no, you're going to take over as Commander 5th Brigade. So my association with Reserve is Chief of Staff and Commander 5th Brigade. And can I say both postings were a great privilege, and I might say they were very challenging, and other people can decide whether I was successful or not, but I think I was. Look, we have one of the best trained defence forces in the world. There's just no doubt about it. We're very proud of what they've done on operations, and just as proud as what they've done in support of Australia during the floods, the fires, and now the pandemic COVID-19. I'm going to dwell a little bit on the latter three. For the first time in my knowledge, we've actually got very, very positive media coverage for the Defence Force. And part of that coverage, if not a significant part of it, has been for the reservists that have put their hands up and gone out and helped our communities and the states across Australia. All I can say is well done to the reserve. I think from memory, Ed said about 3,000 or so were involved. That's a significant number when you have a look at the size of the reserve today. I stress the community. I've got a young grandson who graduated from the Royal Military College Duntroon a few years ago, about to be promoted captain. And I talked to him, not that frequently, but probably every 6 months or so. And the last time I spoke to him, I said, Ben, how are you going with all the extra tasks that you've got? And he said, Grandad, he said, I'm proud of my team. He said they put their hands up when the request came out for us to join in the floods and the fires, and particularly for the pandemic. And this young man was very proud of what his soldiers did. So from the point of view of the reserve, it's great to see them as an integral part of the Defence Force. I recall when I graduated a long time ago, I didn't know what the reserve was. And over the years, it's gradually got more involved, and today, quite candidly, and I think people would agree with me, the reserve is an integral part of what the regular army gets involved in with the assistance of the reserve. I thank Ed for proposing the toast, and thank you very much.